I'm Professor Leena Ajit Kaushal. I'm from Management Development Institute, Gurgaon, India. And I'll be talking about have Indian deep trade agreements achieved their export potential and the implications for the future. So if I talk about the abstract of the study, so the present study investigates the export potential of India's deep and shallow trade agreements over the last 2 decades by employing stochastic frontier gravity model. The analysis investigates if the level of integration matters, and the study further explores if the deep trade agreements supported Indian trade during pandemic times. The study finds that deep trade agreements have achieved approximately 50% efficiency over the period of study and have not promoted exports, unlike the shallow trade agreements, even during the pandemic. Now, exactly what pushed us, or what's the real reason to conduct such a study? So everyone knows that year 2022 heralds a dramatic shift from India's cautious stance to renewed interest in deep trade agreements, notably with developed countries like United Kingdom, Australia, European Union, etc. Now, India's push for new trade agreements is partially driven by its ambition to reach a $5 trillion economy by 2025. That's untenable without a strong export growth and increasing recognition to Made in India brand internationally. India's first trade agreement was, past trade agreements were mostly with the developing nations, but following the revised strategy, India is presently negotiating with developed nations to enhance country exports and advance the value chain. Now, due to the shared perception of China as a concern to global commerce and domestic industry, India's strategic and domestic ties with these countries have increased recently. These high-cost economies are looking for mass manufacturing outside China. India is eager to reach early harvest agreements, liberalizing select tariff lines to expedite the FTAs with some countries. However, there is no denying that India's prior trade agreements have mostly contributed to considerable economic loss by enabling subsidized foreign goods and other unfair manufacturing advantage for foreign countries. Well, the scope and the depth of trade agreements, they vary according to the nature of the markets involved in discussions and their distinct interests. Custom unions and FTAs that include an economic integration treaty are classified as deep trade agreements, and partial scope agreements, that is preferential trade agreements, or the economic integrations free trade agreements standalone are considered as shallow. Partial duty exemptions on select tariff lines results from shallow trade agreements. Well, in comparison, deep agreements, being comprehensive in nature, also addresses non-tariff barriers such as sanitary and phytosanitary measures, quantitative limits, import licensing, intellectual property right, trade facilitation, trade in services, investment, along with extensive tariff concessions across the majority of tariff lines. And that is what India is trying to negotiate with the developed countries as of now. Well, most of India's past preferential scope agreements are shallow regarding product coverage. Now, for geopolitical rather than commercial regions, India has signed numerous regional trade agreements with these countries such as SAFTA, ASEAN, Mercosur, etc., where Indian exports are subject to different tariff and non-tariff restrictions. As the importance of global supply chains and the service sector increased, worldwide shallow tariff agreements gave way to deeper commitments. And so India too has deep trade agreements, that is CEPA and CISA, with Japan, Singapore, South Korea and ASEAN. Nevertheless, despite widespread conviction in the ability of deep trade agreements, India has not witnessed any substantial export growth but suffered huge trade deficit, barring the agreement with Singapore. Now, in fact, since 2001, these trade agreements with these nations came into effect, India's participation in global merchandise exports has remained almost constant, around 1.7%. Now, this was the entire background. If I talk about the theoretical framework and methodology that I have used, yes, I have used stochastic frontier gravity technique to analyze the data sources and to estimate India's export potential with its 153 trading partners from 2002 to 2020. These are the different variables that have been used: exports, GDP of the exporting partner, importing partner, the distance, the real effective exchange rates. Now, using secondary data, the conventional gravity model has been successful and popular in explaining bilateral trade flows between countries, and it was first applied by Isad or to international trade, arguing that higher GDP and shorter distance between countries will boost bilateral trade flow. The estimated equation is as follows. Now looking at this, it's quite evident that yes, RTAs has definitely helped India, but if I look at the shallow trade agreements, inefficiency, when the sign is negative, that means they have reduced the inefficiency, but for deep RTAs, it's positive. So that means they have not reduced the inefficiencies for Indian trade. Now, findings further reveal that India's RTA, both FTA and PTA, have significantly promoted Indian exports. However, deep trade agreements have not reduced technical inefficiencies of Indian exports. Study further finds that RTAs have achieved 42% technical efficiencies vis-a-vis 22% among non-RTA partners. So having a trade agreement is always beneficial compared to no trade agreement. But FTA and PTA has achieved only 46 and 42% of the technical efficiency respectively, further categorizing RTAs into deep and shallow. So deep agreements, if I talk about the overall 2020 from 2002 to 2020, they have achieved approximately 53% vis-a-vis 43% in the shallow. But if I look from 2010, when major changes has happened in the India, the technical efficiency of export has been more pronounced under shallow trade agreements vis-a-vis deep trade agreements. Now data suggests that only 26% exports transpires through RTA route, with shallow RTAs comprising a higher share, that is 68% compared to deep trade agreements. Oh my god. Okay, so one second. I think my PPT has an issue, but one second, I'll just talk about the conclusion. So the study suggests that deep trade agreements focuses on domestic regulations to eliminate trade barriers and boost global trade. Therefore, India must develop product and process standards. Standards in international trades are vital, since products do not meet a country's standard cannot be sold. Now, for instance, Sri Lanka does not allow sanitary ware shipments if they are not packed in 5-ply corrugated boxes, which India doesn't produce enough. Now, barriers like these are not usually deliberate, but they result from regulatory inconsistencies. So, harmonizing standards is vital for India to eliminate trade impediments caused by the asymmetrical country standards. The early harvest agreements should also contain a timeline for implementing full force FTA. India should adopt a cautious strategic stance to gain from potential trade agreements. Now, learning from the past FTA experiences, India certainly need more comprehensive, well-negotiated FDA to maximize benefit. India should extend its existing TA on mutually beneficial terms and trade complementarities to realize its full export potential, harmonize and reinforce regulatory standards, and integrate into global GVC through FDI. Now, instead of extending negative or sensitive lists or advocating high import tariffs, intricate FTA negotiation should focus on non-tariff barriers, especially the technical barriers and the rules of origin. That's all from my side. Thank you so much. I'm open to questions.
Dr. Leena, as for the audience, does anyone have any questions for Dr. Leena?
I'm so sorry, I'm presenting in a very abrupt situation. I had some medical emergency, but then I wanted to do it. That's why I presented.
Fine.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for further research, Dr. Leena? Any recommendation for the researcher to complete something missing in this research? Dr. Leena?
Thank you so much then.
Did you hear my question?
No, I couldn't hear your question, please.
Do you have any recommendations for further research?
Yes, I have recommendations for further research, because as of now I am studying deep agreements only in context of India, but I want to extend it to the entire Asian region, because it is just not India that wants to attract FDI and promote export, but Similarly, it's the Thailand, it's Singapore, and it's Bangladesh, Vietnam, Philippines, everyone in the race. So let's see that how deep trade agreements in their countries they are able to leverage, so that it could be a lesson learned for India for further policy making. That's
Thank
what
you.
I want to.